Hi, this is Kraen Hansen. I'm a senior software engineer at MongoDB working on Realm. Welcome to the MongoDB podcast. Stay tuned to learn more about MongoDB and the JavaScript SDKs for Realm. And it's a mobile database that's very intuitive for the people using it because it's not wrapping some other tabular database or some other store. It's basically, as a programmer, the way you interact with it is you get objects, store data and properties, and you use it as you would be using any other object that is there runtime. And that's a very different way of working with the database than what we're used to.
Welcome back to the show. Today is yet another in the series on Realm SDKs. If you're following along, in episode 42 we spoke with Jason Flax all about the Realm Mobile for iOS SDK. Episode 45, we talked with Christian Melchior about Realm Mobile for Android. In episode 61, we chatted with Nikola Irinchev and discussed the .NET SDK. Today, Shane McAllister returns, leads a discussion with Kraen Hansen, developer on the JavaScript SDK. We learn all about the background, how this JavaScript SDK came to be, why you, as a mobile developer, might be interested in leveraging this SDK, how you might go about doing that. Stay tuned. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, Shane, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you on the show again. What's going on today?
Well, this today is very interesting because we've been doing this over the past probably 6 or 7 months in trying to sneak in a podcast with members and senior engineers of the Realm SDK teams. And this is essentially our last, but certainly by no means least, SDK that we have here today. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Kraen Hansen, who is the senior software engineer for our JavaScript SDKs. So, we've got a wide audience listening to this podcast. I, in my view anyway, consider the JavaScript SDKs as probably one of the hardest SDKs because you've got so many people to please. It can be used in so many varied ways. So really, really excited to have Kraen join us today. Welcome, Kraen.
Thank you. For sure.
Welcome.
Good. So we've as I said, we've done a number of these, and what I like to do, and I think I need to be consistent because we've done it to every other person who's appeared on the Realm version of the podcast, is to essentially take us back to what your first phone was, because we use this in a kind of quirky way to date you, to understand where you sit in the mobile ecosystem.
First off, I think it's good for me to say I'm all caught up with the podcast episodes. I've listened to all of them and I really enjoy them. So I know the drill. I prepared a bit for the phone part, at least. I want to say like a trick answer. My first phone was my friend's dad's car phone, and it was basically something that he didn't have to use anymore. I couldn't use it. Okay. I didn't have a SIM card for it, but it was just cool walking around with that brick of a battery.
They were huge. I think really Mike Lynn remembers those ones, right? I think
I had one. Yeah.
So I did too. I don't know if that dates me. I doubt it.
Well, the fact that you've called it a car phone, I mean, this is the thing, right? They were all car phones at the very beginning. Yeah. They weren't mobile phones.
It's funny, in Danish you say biltelefon, and for a mobile phone you say mobiltelefon. So you can actually, I don't know, it sounds almost the same, mobil or bil, like a car.
Kraen, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small suburb outside of Roskilde. Roskilde is a town. It's like half an hour's drive from Copenhagen.
Has a famous rock festival there, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great festival. I've been there, I think, maybe 29 times or something.
Oh,
like
wow.
That. Yeah.
Brilliant.
My dad has a tattoo on his arm with like the canopy and then a stripe for every time he's been.
You didn't follow suit? You didn't go down that road yourself?
No, I think once you go into tattooing, then you need to get a lot more. I think it's like either you do it or you don't. What do you think, Mike?
Well, before we go any further, I do kind of want to ask you how you got into technology, into software development.
I think I got interested as a teenager. I had a cousin that was building a startup, and I started just playing around. I think I was just a very early in my teens. We started messing around with geocities.com, just doing small funny websites, jokes online. And then I started learning to steal snippets of JavaScript. It was called Dhtml, dynamic HTML. back in the
I
days.
remember.
Yeah, and I basically stole it off websites if there was like a cool menu, drop-down menu I really loved. And then I stole the JavaScript and I tried to basically distill it by
Mhm.
taking each line and deleting it. I couldn't read JavaScript, so I just deleted a line, and if it was still functioning, then I would leave the line out. And then if I broke it, I would put the line back in and go to the next line and delete it. So that was basically how I started understanding the syntax, but that was just super painful. I think like I didn't understand English good enough to actually read a manual, so it was just trial and error all the way. And I think that's stuck with me in general. Like I try it out first and then I read the manual afterwards.
I think that's really interesting because I was talking to a young developer the other day, and I don't know, and I do know because I remember it being very hard and you needed manuals, but how we ever did anything before Stack Overflow and
Mhm.
websites to go look up things. And I really love that idea that you were deleting lines of code to see what the effect of deleting lines of code. And that's the beautiful thing about web. You just right click and view source, and
Yeah.
you can see how
Once
they
I
made
learned
it.
that, I was off to the races.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah. So then I basically, there's a lot of history in this, but like I started a company with a guy that I learned to know from playing Counter-Strike online. And we basically started a company. He was 2 years older than me, so he could legally start a company, but I couldn't. And then we just did websites for clans, Counter-Strike clans and local businesses. And then high school happened, and then I studied computer science at university. I started a consultancy back in 2012, and that was before I graduated. 2 years after, we did a merger, and then I left the company in 2017. So that was, I guess, like a couple of years of consulting before I went with the Realm. I actually liked that a lot. That I had a chance to do consultancy before I came to a company like this. I think that's the same history you have, right, Shane,
Yeah,
as a
and,
consultant.
I would share that history, and it's nice and it's varied, and you get a lot of exposure, right, to different technologies and different tech
Mm,
stacks and stuff. But also, the one thing that frustrated me was when the job was done, and you
yeah,
you kind of go, no, I'd like to do a bit more. I think there's a version 2 here, there's a version 2.1, and
yeah.
I think that's quite frustrating. So being part of a product company, it's good because you can iterate on that vision and that longer term view, right?
I agree. I think we did something interesting where we basically we said to our customers they were more like larger organizations, and often they were government funded in a way. They were not necessarily government institutions, but it was museums and the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. They had no need for their source code to be closed, so we did open source projects only,
Oh
and
wow,
that
okay.
way we could basically take this work that we did with a particular museum and we could take it to another museum and ask for their funding to keep on developing. So that
Aha,
way we could actually
brilliant.
stick with
Yeah.
the projects over time in a nice way.
Okay.
And that
So
was
each
also my,
client funded each new
yeah,
client kind of funded the growth of the software that you were
yeah,
building.
exactly. And we try to do projects and like basically products that would, where we would gather a community around and have them organize how they would be funding it over time. And I still think that's a great idea. There's a huge potential in that. But I think I, I wanted to try something else. But at that point in time, we also wanted to move abroad. Me and my wife, now wife, we were not married at that point, and MongoDB, sorry, at that point, Realm had an office abroad. They had multiple offices around the world as well, but in San Francisco in particular. And then life happened. I got twins at some point, and then now we. Yeah.
Great. So you joined Realm in 2017, but over in San Francisco.
No, well, actually, I never really traveled over there. Like
Okay.
I started here, and we wanted to transfer in on a visa to get the proper documents, but we never really transferred in because I got the girls. That's one reason, but also I don't know, it was just not that big of a priority once I got started here. And
Of
also
course.
there was Realm was in a very turbulent time just before the acquisition, like a half a year before.
Mhm.
So where basically the engineering part of the SF office almost went away. Yeah.
So tell us about the time of the acquisition. There was a couple previous on the podcast who were there as well too, but it's
Hmm.
interesting to see, how it affects people and the changes. We see it from time to time. all the time, nearly actually, in the software industry, larger companies acquiring smaller companies for
Yeah.
the people, for the resources, for the IP, for their tech stack, etc. So, how did it affect you at the time, and what has changed since then?
It's definitely interesting. Like it was when we first heard of it, it was very much the feeling of wow, now we're gonna get swallowed. Like it's a big beast coming for us. It's we hope it's gonna be okay, right? You don't know, you know what
Sure.
you have, but you don't know what you're gonna get. But I was very pleasantly surprised to learn how much MongoDB has it together for their employees. To be honest, I was very surprised that. So basically, the story is 1 week after the acquisition was finalized, I because I had the built up tenure, I guess it's called,
Hmm. Hmm.
from my time at Realm. I was considered a full MongoDB employee, and I was actually able to 1 week after the acquisition finalized to go on paternity leave for 18 weeks, just straight
Wow.
on, right?
Hmm.
That was and I just got that benefit just because we got acquired, and I think that they actually allowed that for somebody that just got on board with an acquisition. I think that was pretty cool. And I would say just on a personal level, like afterwards, we've been very autonomous in the company, but at the same time also, I've been very happy to see that. Like Michael, now I see you in a Realm shirt, right? We kept a lot of the stuff that I liked about Realm was also the visual identity and the branding around that, and I think that was really good that you kept that as well for so long at least. So
Yeah,
embracing us.
yeah, and I think that's it. That's a great word, embracing. I think from early on in talks with Elliot and really the rest of the team here at MongoDB, it's really been a great appreciation for the technology that Realm brought to the table, and we talk about this from time to time. The overlap between what we were trying to do
Mhm.
with in the mobile space and what had already been done by Realm, and
Yeah.
it's just such a great marriage. So yeah, go ahead.
I'll say also just this experience of the developers that were working on the mobile offering you had before joining up with us, teaming up, actually is basically moving to Copenhagen for a lot of these people
Hmm.
uh, for extended periods of time. And I think that was a very nice gesture, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Right.
good stuff. So the acquisition happened at an interesting time in your life, right around the time when your daughters came along. Talk a little bit about, you know, being able to take that time off and what was that transition like for you? I assume these are your first children?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the two
Yeah.
girls. So I've got twins now, and they're 3 years old. So it's correct. They were just around that time, and I think I just had a lot of support from my manager and everyone around me. I think I was able to go on first off the paternity leave, but then after that I scaled down and I was first off like working from home 3 days a week, and I was also scaling down, becoming a part time employee at 25 hours a week, and I've been like that since then until this actually September. I moved up to 30 hours per week just because I realized that I was actually working a lot more than than what my contract said. But I think just this thing about like being able to embrace that family happens, and I want to be able to be there for my kids when they're young and being supported in that. I think that was really good. I don't know how, to be honest, I actually don't know how much that happens in MongoDB, but I think that we are able to do it, and I think that's just a great testament to how much MongoDB has put their employees center, as well as their customers and all that stuff. But as an
Hmm.
employee, I think that's really nice.
That the in the COVID came along. I know I joined the company in January 2020. So 2 months later,
Mhm.
after thankfully two trips to Copenhagen and
Mhm.
over to New York to kind of cement some of these relationships, COVID came along, and I think that has accelerated most companies' thoughts about what is working. Working is not the workplace. Working is what people do, and I think it's very easy now to understand, having come through all of this, when you have really, really good, motivated people who are, and everybody I meet across the organization is incredibly intelligent, incredibly bright, that the barriers to creating great work and collaborating together have really, really come down. And the flexibility that you say, Kraen, in being able to do 25, now grown to 30 hours and still manage things is superb. And I think it's very refreshing to hear this. And it's also very refreshing, I think, still to see, Zooms being interrupted by children in the background and dogs and cats and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that people are human and to feel that you also get encouraged to be human.
Yeah, the recognition that we are all human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great.
So the size of, I suppose we talked about the acquisition, and we know that the Realm engineering team overall has grown hugely as well too. So you talked about the acquisition and how overall the Realm team has grown. Talk to us about where the JavaScript team are and who's on the JavaScript team and whereabouts are they based.
Yeah. So the Realm.js team is currently 4 people: Andrew, Frank, me, and Kenneth. And Andrew is in Germany, but Frank and Kenneth and me, we are in close to Copenhagen. And we also recently had a new hire. He's based out of London.
So, okay, so we have a good idea about the size of the team. Let's talk a little bit about the technology and maybe for folks that might be joining this episode as their first in the series, maybe, Kraen, could you explain what Realm is and then maybe dive into the JavaScript SDK from there?
For sure. So I think it's crucial to understand that, first off, Realm's inception, like the core idea is that Realm is a mobile database. And it's a mobile database that's very intuitive for the people using it, because it's not wrapping some other tabular database or some other store. It's basically, as a programmer, the way you interact with it is you get objects, you store data and properties, and you basically use it as you would be using any other object that is there runtime. And that's a very different way of working with the database than what we're used to. On top of that, we have an offering where you can synchronize your data between devices, and it uses the same underlying local database in your phone, but now you just enable synchronization, and it's literally 5 lines of code that you need to add, and then you start synchronizing. You synchronize to this using Realm Sync to a platform, and that data gets into MongoDB Atlas. Realm used to have another server component, but now we switched to using Atlas, which makes a lot more sense. We were actually running the mobile database on servers, and it was not built for that. So it's much better to use Atlas.
So on the back end, we've got an Atlas, a MongoDB database that is catching the synchronizations from the mobile devices, which have the mobile Realm database on them, right?
Yeah, correct. And so built around that, the service, if you can say, it's much more than just the Atlas part. We also have, well, because when you're doing something like that, like synchronizing from a client to a server, you want to enforce rules on what data can go in and who can actually access what. And you also want to perhaps trigger events of the day. Like if somebody adds a document, maybe you want to clean it up, maybe you want to store some other data somewhere else, maybe you want to request some external service, and all those things is orchestrated by the Realm application services that live next to Realm Sync on the server side. So there are functions, triggers. There's a service that will allow you to do CRUD operations on the Atlas cluster, the same way that you would use a regular, let's say, the Node.js driver. But because you don't want to allow every client in the world, like we're talking about code that executes on your users' devices, you don't want to give them permission to do whatever query or whatever insertion into your database. So you can use this remote MongoDB service to basically filter and apply permissions before those modifications happen to the cluster.
The Realm ecosystem, we've got to cater for all mobile developers and web developers. So we've got a number of SDKs. So where does the JS SDK fit in within that? How is it being used? What type of apps are usually built using the JS SDK?
Yeah, so I think that's maybe the point where my conversation is a little different from the other conversations
Hmm.
you've had. Our main focus, I would say, is React Native. Because we are a mobile database, we want to cater to mobile developers first off. So that's going to be React Native, and we're primarily focusing on Android. And I know that there's a lot more momentum currently happening around running React Native apps on Macs and Windows as well. So that's definitely also something we're interested in. But currently, we support iOS and Android and Mac when you run it as a Catalyst app. But that's it. Yeah. So that's React Native, and then the other side is Node.js, and that can be used if you have a, let's say, like a server-side component or a Raspberry Pi, or it can also power Electron-based apps as well. So that's got to be desktop apps
Hmm.
built for Windows, Linux, or or Mac.
You typically run JavaScript on the client. Obviously, there's a server side implementation, Node.js, and where is the database? Let's say I'm a developer. I have an idea for an app. I want to run Realm as my database. I want to use the Realm object database. So I'm plugging away and I'm developing using Node.js. I want to incorporate Realm. I'm thinking that I can use the Realm JavaScript SDK and begin to manipulate objects for my application.
Mhm.
And now I'm still on the back end. I'm still using Node.js running on a server. My question is, where is the database? Are you manipulating objects, caching them, storing them on the server side, or is it writing to a database in Atlas or
I would say using the Realm.js SDK on a server is, I would say it's a niche use case. It's not our primary use case. Like the primary use
Hmm.
case would be
Hmm.
React Native.
mobile?
But using the Node.js, like, because you could use the Node.js MongoDB driver instead on a
Yeah,
server. That would
yeah.
be the obvious choice. But you can also use Realm. Let's say that you have let's say you're hosting a web server on a spotty connection. That maybe you're on a ship and you're
Hmm.
hosting a service. Then that would be a good choice, a mobile database like that, because as you said, the data is stored cached locally on the disk of the server before it's getting synchronized to the Atlas instance.
That's the real value, right? I mean, it's this offline first mentality. Yeah, and I don't want to have to be concerned about writing the logic behind what objects in my database to sync and when, and dealing with the mismatches and all of the synchronization issues that come with writing an offline first app, right?
Yeah, of course. I just said Realm Sync as it was something simple. It's not at all. Like, well, from a consumer's point of view, it is, but Realm Sync is definitely a complex piece of the machinery, automatic conflict resolution, and all that stuff. It's really good. I have to say that,
So,
but I also feel that. Like the first time
yeah.
I built, I also built a Realm Studio, which is the UI for browsing Realm databases. We used to be able to open synchronized realms, so you would just point it to a server and you could open up the realm. The first time I experienced synchronizing between a device in my hand up to a server and back to the UI of my studio instance, that was amazing. Like I was just like that was really cool. It felt really
Mhm.
great.
And Studio was an Electron app, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, use the Realm.js SDK. It's an Electron app.
So we're using our own products to build our own tools, which is always good in my book.
This episode is brought to you by MongoDB.local. MongoDB.local is a great event that's coming to London on November 9th. It's a uniquely hybrid experience offering education, exploration, and entertainment, curated for those joining live in person at Evolution London, live from home, or on demand on your own schedule. You can visit mongodb.link/London Local to get more information and register today. And if you're planning on being there at Evolution London, make sure you stop by the podcast booth and say hello.
You mentioned obviously React Native, Node.js, Electron, but JavaScript being widely adopted across many different frameworks. We have others out there, Ionic and Expo and Angular, etc. How do you manage to build an SDK that has so many possibilities of use by a developer?
Realm.js is a repository of two implementations side by
Hmm.
side. It's not how we ideally wanted it to be, but that's what the technical limitations you could say is. We have Realm.js on one side. It's built on top of we have Realm.js on one side. It's built on top of Realm Core, which is a C++ library that we built it on top of, and it has the mobile database and sync capabilities and all that stuff. On the other side, we also have Realm Web, which is a pure TypeScript implementation of the client for the application services that I talked about before. That's functions and the MongoDB CRUD API, authentication, all that stuff. So, and those two are actually parallel implementations that we're maintaining. So, you were asking about how do we support. So on web, we have this pure TypeScript implementation that could compile to or transpile to JavaScript and run there. It doesn't support sync yet. It doesn't support an object database, but we want to look into that, and we are also doing experiments around compiling the core C++ library to a WebAssembly module and consuming that as a part of this thing. That's one direction we're going in. On the other hand, Realm.js, we implement our library like the vast majority is written in C++. It's consuming multiple JavaScript runtime engines. We are supporting V8 through the NAPI, and we're also consuming and supporting JavaScript Core, which was the standard JavaScript engine in React Native. And now that Hermes is along, this new JavaScript engine, we also recently, and that's what I've been working on for the last 1.5 months at least, rewriting or implementing a new abstraction, the JSI abstraction, JavaScript interface, which basically means that we will be supporting Hermes and JavaScript Core when running on the React Native platform. We have two alpha releases out now that actually does support Android and iOS when running with Hermes.
I'm super curious about Hermes, and can you share any details around the performance metrics of Realm running against the Hermes engine?
So to be honest, our current implementation is we've been very focused about getting green tests, like functionally passing, and we haven't been focused on optimizing our way of doing that. So there were some corners that got cut, and that's something that we also need to invest more in, like the quality of that implementation. So it's not production ready in that sense. So I can't really speak to the performance because it's not something we've really thoroughly tested. But there are benefits to the way that we are bootstrapping the library. On Android, for example, we are implementing currently the turbo modules, which means that our library is going to be our library code is going to be instantiated, or it's going to be initialized when it's being used and not on app startup time as it used to be. That means if you only have a screen like 3 pages down in your app that uses Realm, it's only going to be loading then and not. So that's basically cutting off a lot of time in your startup. And I think Hermes in general, it's been reported that it's way faster in startup time in general. It's also because there's part of the runtime that they're not implementing. So it's not a general purpose JavaScript environment necessarily. It's very specific to the needs that a React app needs, basically a React Native app. But I think Facebook can talk more about Hermes than I can. They built it.
So that's in alpha at the moment. So if you want to get it, you can get it. And by the time this podcast comes out, we hopefully maybe are further on down the line. I mean, not without any dates, and we won't commit you to anything now. But is it month, 2 months? Is it next year?
It's near. It's our top, and you can try it out. Do npm install Realm at Hermes, and then you're gonna get the alpha release. And you need to use that currently you need to use it with the latest release candidate version of React Native. There were some issues that we needed to have fixed before we could actually do our implementation properly. So Facebook has been really good. The Facebook engineers has been very responsive in that and fixing issues as we saw them come along. So that's been really good.
You mentioned there the JSI and the JavaScript interface. This is, so always at the level that the engineering teams work at, I'm always amazed at how you keep up with, emerging trends different technologies. You're working with breaking technologies all the time, as does our advocacy team. We try to keep ahead of things as well too. But it must be super hard to keep abreast of developments. Where do you go to learn yourself, Kraen? How do you keep on top of what's going on in the ecosystem in general?
I think what I do is I spend time with people that are smarter than me and just have big ears, and I'm not afraid to
Good
spark up a
answer.
conversation. I also like asking stupid questions to have somebody provoked enough that they actually tell me how the world looks from their perspective. So I think that's one part of it. I don't wanna. I'm not spending too much time. I've tried. I have a Twitter profile. Like I've tried doing that, follow some people, but it just becomes like a wall of text for me. I can't really decipher what is actually important, what is not important right now. So I rely heavily on the filter of other people to basically tell me the news when it happens. That's the same for like news in general. What happens in the
Mhm.
real world as well. I'm not. I don't go watch the news that much. I try to stay away from that. I think that I like to see myself as like a T-shaped developer, right? So have a broad knowledge of a lot of things and specialized knowledge in specific areas where you really can go super deep.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's not necessarily important to be on every that's out there. Like if you have like a vague knowledge of this train is moving somewhere in that direction, it's gonna take time before it gets adoption. And I just learned that a lot of times I can pretty quickly get my head around a new technology if I deem it's worth my time and
Mhm.
energy. So I think just having like a broad perspective of things, knowing where things are going, and then dive in if there's something I really want to learn. I'll take out a week to really nail it and understand it, and put in the time and energy to really understand it.
And I'm reminded of the old saying that if you chase two rabbits, you rarely catch one. So kind of focusing
Yeah,
is a good thing.
but I'm also in that sense I am a broad developer. Like I used to do like web development, and now I'm doing mobile. And I've done consultancy. Like I'm a Scrum Master certified, and I've done that a lot. And like I do wear many hats, and I also like wearing many hats. But I still think it's possible to dive deep in many areas actually if you dedicate yourself. Recently, like I've been programming C++ on and off since high school, but I never really took the time to learn it actually, to be honest. And I recently read a crash course C++ book and spent just the time and energy that was needed to really nail it. And I think I've become a lot better at writing C++.
So we talked about the sources of information and where you look to stay up to date. What about the community? Do you engage in the Realm community still, and are you active in the forums?
I am, yeah. We have Slack channels that will basically write every time somebody writes a post in the Realm namespace or with the Realm tag, and I read all those. And I also dive in and get into conversations, try to answer some of the questions, especially in the stuff that I build.
Tell the folks that are listening that maybe they're diving in and have some questions. Where do they go to interact with the Realm community?
Currently, there would be forum.mongodb. Sorry, would be the community forums, but they are on community.mongodb.com. And we're trying to stay active as well in various other communities, like Discord channels. There's a good React Native Discord channel for contributors, and there's also the Reactify Discord. I think the community.mongodb.com is a good starting point. There's a lot of resources, and other people have asked questions that you might also be asking. So there's some history there. I think if you have a problem or a feature request, GitHub is always available on our repository, and we're very welcoming to people that try to get a feature. At least we try to. Yeah, I think that would be the major sources of places to get out.
And I think, and by all means, this is a plug, I suppose, too, is that now that the world is opening up again to both the advocacy team and indeed some of the Realm engineers are at conferences and events and hopefully meetups as well too, which is a superb place to try to engage. And if not only to hear what the latest trends are and what we're building and how we're going about that. But it's the hallway conversations, it's the lunch queue conversations. And I think as we get back to normality, I hope that this will become commonplace, that you will see people with Realm t-shirts wandering around at events and conferences near you as well too.
I agree. That's something I'm looking very much forward to, and also something we are actively looking into getting opportunities to actually talk about this. But we have also been in situations here where we wanna get that Hermes support. We wanna get those new features that we can brag about, right? Realm.js has been around for a long, long time. We have had, I think, I'm not gonna look at this. We have like 94 contributors to the repository.
Wow.
So it has history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we also in that sense it's been a code base that has changed a lot, and we have some stuff that we need to get in order, and we're doing that finally, you can say. So I'm going to be very happy to come out and talk about, for example, the Hermes support or our new project. We're working on like better React integration, providing, for example, a hooks-based API into Realm, which is something that's for a React Native first library is interesting that we haven't had that. But it's basically because we've been around since before hooks, so that's why we're adding that now. Yeah.
Wow. So your team is busy, and I know that feeling. You want to go out there and extol the virtues of what you've built, but you want to make sure that it gets received well by the developer community as well too. And as you say, it's a movable feast. New features, new functions, new frameworks to support as well too. So you mentioned there Hermes has taken a lot of the team's time. React integration, better React integration coming up, and the hooks API. That sounds superb.
Yeah, the initial reaction we've got on GitHub specifically on the pull requests for adding Hermes has been very, very positive, and people can't wait to really get their hands on this. Yeah, so I'm gonna look forward to seeing the community's reaction as they start shipping those apps as well, and getting the benefit from the work we've put in.
So this has been superb, and I think we could probably go on equally as long again, getting deep into the woods as to what you've been building. But I'm super impressed, with the breadth and the, everything that you guys are taking care of in the Realm SDK team, and it's superb. And the integration with the community, and 94 people have been working on the GitHub project there as well, is superb. So to wrap up, what we'd like, I think first of all, from my point of view, a plug here again is to join the Realm global community. If you're looking to pick up any of our meetups that we run, which is usually 1 or 2 a month, join the Realm global community, which is just community.mongodb.com. Again, go in there, and as soon as we add a new event, you automatically get emailed about it. Now, we do it across all the SDKs. So you may be an iOS developer, so you're looking out for our Cocoa team and what they're doing. But we will certainly have events here for the JS team coming up as well too. And they are very informal, and we like to bring our audience on screen live to ask their own questions, either from the advocates or mostly from actually the engineers who put together the SDKs that our developers are using. So that's superb. But outside of that, Kraen, where else can people go? And how you're on Twitter, you mentioned earlier. So how can they find you? What's your Twitter handle? And tell us a little bit more about what we could do for anybody who's interested to try out all of the new things that your team have been building.
Yeah, so folks are very welcome to follow me on Kraen Hansen. It's Kraen Hansen. And I'm not posting too much, to be honest, but if you follow me, I guess we can DM or whatever if there's some specific questions that you have, or just tweet me. I think that's a good point. Otherwise, GitHub, I think, is a good source of. I like that you can reference code, structure your examples, structure your code snippets. I think I like that part about it. Yeah, and otherwise the community, the MongoDB forum. Definitely, you can also tag me there, and I'm going to be reading that as well.
Shane, thanks so much for bringing Kraen. And Kraen, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Shane for leading the discussion with Kraen, and thanks to Kraen for joining us. And telling us all about the JavaScript SDK. If you want to get started with MongoDB Atlas or MongoDB Realm, head on over to cloud.mongodb.com. You can start for free. No credit card required. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Consider leaving a rating and some feedback on Apple Podcasts if you're listening there. Have a great day.